Okay, here we go. Looking at his right shoulder finally on August 24th, 2015. So first, examine your shoulder. It's got good range of motion. It does have a little bit of front to back play like athletic guys' shoulders tend to have. You're now on your left side on the surgery center. So here's your right shoulder on its side with the humeral head up above, up here, and then the glenoid, the socket below. So humeral head above, the socket below. The scope is in the back of the shoulder looking to the front. I'll watch this little air bubble through. Coming in for the front is this cannula, 5.5 millimeter tube that serves as access to the outside. So this will be fun. We'll kind of take a tour of all the things that they thought maybe were and weren't happening with the shoulder. On your MRI 4 years ago, they thought there was a 80% of the rotator cuff tendon was torn 40 to 50% of the way through up in here. Remember, you and I didn't buy that at all. Maybe a little bit of undersurface fraying at the front, but certainly I'd say it looks like normal rotator cuff here. The other question was the recent person who thought you had a biceps issue. So here's the long head of the biceps coming from the top of the socket, going out through the shoulder and down to the arm. So you can put the hook on the biceps and pull it way down. So we want to make sure that where it goes out of the joint, it's fine. And this is better than fine. That's just a completely normal looking, smooth, shiny. So we'll take that little bit of rotator cuff fraying from behind it. We'll trim this out while we're looking with the scope. But certainly I think we're here with the right plans for just the right problem. Because what you do have for sure is labral tearing. You do have this thing on the lower part of the cartilage, which that's exactly like the MRI would have predicted it to look years ago. Of everything going on, I bet this is what's causing you the most irritation, as that's catching back and forth in the joint. That's that little bit of cartilage that looked like it was in its own little sort of a crater. And how that became loose is hard to know because the rest of the joint looks fabulous. And this is not a joint that's losing joint cartilage, but that one spot looked abnormal 4 years ago and looks abnormal the same way now. So let's see other stuff though first before we do any trimming. As I come to the front of your shoulder, so going towards the cannula is going to the front. This is your front rotator cuff tendon up here, the subscapularis, completely normal looking joint lining tissue. I'm going to come through and look over the top of the subscapularis. There's a potential space down here called the subcoracoid recess. So subscapularis on the right, looking way down into this recess. It's looking like we're standing in the front of your socket looking inward toward your chest. People with loose pieces, they often get stuck down there. That looks normal. So back to the joint. This also is the sort of thing that tends to be so irritating. If you have frayed tissue that's catching, this is off the superior labrum, like a meniscus in a knee joint, that's a big source of irritation. So that's the sort of stuff that arthroscopically we should be able to trim and get you back in business. Anterior inferior glenoid and labrum, inferior labrum down in here, just a little separation of that. Again, you don't really have clear shoulder instability findings. In fact, if anything, your shoulder shifts to the back as much as the front, but there's a little separation of this, a little fraying of the cartilage on the inferior part. This is stuff I want to be trimming so it can't be catching, but I don't think any of that needs to be actually reattached back. So down to the armpit side, the axillary recess, and again, very normal looking lining surfaces. This does not look like an inflamed shoulder. Along the lower back where the capsule attaches, that's a very nice sort of expansive view of this. So back of the head, back of the rotator cuff. Here, a couple air bubbles just from the saline that we put in. There's always a little bit of air in the lines, and kind of wash that through. This is the normal bare patch on the back of the head. If this was related to an unstable shoulder, it would be this bare patch and then cartilage and then another bare patch. But yours is this is just the normal anatomy of what the back of a shoulder looks like. Completely pristine looking rotator cuff. All back in here. So this whole 80% of the supraspace, which would be about from here to forward, I would say looks 70%, 80% normal. But a little bit of fraying. I will trim that just at the very front part. And the MRI did show that for sure, that little bit of fraying up in here, kind of right behind where the biceps goes out. And then to complete the tour, here's above the socket, supraglenoid fossa, superior labrum with this little fraying here. This is the sort of stuff that probably is actually catching in the joint, this business here. And then posterior labrum, posterior inferior labrum. Yeah, so good. Kind of just what we're hoping to find. So then here's the shaver. And the guys that make it just have a little blade that oscillates back and forth. So all this tissue that's frayed, we can make pretty short work of by pulling suction through the shaver. And that pulls the tissue into the little blade of this, and this we shave it off. So it's like the Floby hair cutter. So a posterior superior, and that does look like a little flap that could easily be catching back and forth. I'll try and trim that out so it can't. All right, up in there, I may need to go switching stick on this to get to that, because that definitely has that look like it can be popping, and we're kind of just massaging it from this angle. So often when there's this much fraying, we'll halfway through the case do a switch and put the scope in the front and the shaver coming in from the back, and that gives better access to some of the tissues that are not as well reached from this angle. So anterior labrum here, and anterior inferior labrum, and this is that, again, I think of everything that's irritating about this bit of cartilage here is the most so. It's hard to know why it would look like that. I can't picture what injury mechanism would cause that to happen, but you're much better to have a little indentation in cartilage than abnormal cartilage that's sticking up and catching. And if anything, the thing to say is it's nice it hasn't caused more irritation to the humeral head. It doesn't look like it's causing any wear and tear. So anterior inferior glenoid here. And you see there's a little bit of loose cartilage down there also. This is that bit that is defying good trimming yet. But I think if I put the shaver back there, I can trim it better. So I'm going to come get this one little bit on the very front undersurface of the supraspinatus. And this won't weaken anything because all this tissue has been frayed for years, and you don't really have rotator cuff findings on exam. I just want to trim out that which could be catching in the joint. Up into there. And again, right next to this biceps, it just looks completely normal. Yeah, right there. Come up a little bit more right by the biceps here, but with my back to the bicep, so it's not irritating yet. So then what I want to do is I want to trim maybe some posterior labrum, maybe some of the softer cartilage here. So to do that without having to fight with the curvature of the head, if I try and push the shaver back, it begins to shave itself. But we use these little switching sticks. So this lets me keep the same spots through your muscles to put the cannula for the scope in the front and this orange cannula behind. So we'll pause for a second with these switching sticks in while we switch positions.